Hello everybody and welcome. In this final exercise we are going to create the after part of the before and after image. This is going to show our progress over the last 7 days, and we are going to use the basic steps which we've been working up to over the last 7 days of exercises. In this video, as a guidance, I will give you an example of what I did, but you of course have to draw your own after image. Don't just copy me, but draw your own after image, and when you're done, you combine the before and after images, see how much progress you made, and that's going to be our project. So I'm gonna draw a dragon from the imagination. But before I get started, I want to get familiar with the basic forms of typical dragons. So I'm going to start with a little bit of research to find some reference images and get a rough idea of what dragons look like in general. And I'm going to use those reference images to get a feel for the basic forms of dragons. After that, we're going to take the same steps as last time. First, we're going to sketch in the basic forms. Then we're going to do the finish lines. Then we're going to sketch in the major regions of shading and highlighting. And after that, we're going to do the coloring. As a bonus, I'm also going to show you how to blend the regions of shading and highlighting. You can choose if you want to do some blending in your own image or not. It's up to you. And all the way at the end, as a second bonus, I'm going to talk about blending modes, and we're going to use the blending mode multiply to add a cast shadow onto the dragon. When you finished your drawing, remember to upload it as a project. It's always fun to share what you've created, and that way I can give you some useful feedback. Not to mention that I'm actually super curious to see what you guys come up with. Let's get started on the next step, which is research. Let's do a very quick internet search for dragons. Let's have a quick look at typical dragon images. We can see that the basic form is kind of serpentesque. So it's basically a bunch of cylinders joined together in a curved way. It's basically a tube. Or here is another kind of dragon which is more of a sphere, and these kind of cylinders are. It kind of has this tube neck and tube tail and some cylinder legs. Or we could draw something like this. Or something like this. This one is looks more like a bit like a wild animal. So I'm actually gonna base my dragon on this one. I'm not gonna draw it in the same pose, but I'm gonna use the same basic forms as this dragon, which is actually a sculpture, I think. Anyway, I'm just gonna take a screenshot and I'm going to paste it to a new layer. Let me hide this. And I'm gonna make a new layer, and I'm gonna put those two layers together in a group, and I'm gonna name that research. And just to get a feel for the basic forms, I'm gonna draw on top of this reference image. Middle of the body is basically a sphere, but then the sphere kind of tapers out like that. I'm gonna approximate it as a kind of cylinder. Like that. So this neck is just a series of cylinders, which are wider on the bottom and they taper out on the top, narrower on the top. Same is true for the tail. Then let's have a look at the head. Okay, now that we have some insight into the basic forms we want to draw, Let's get started with the first stage, basic forms. And that's very roughly our basic forms. Let's add some line art. Okay, before we get on to the next stage, first I'm going to quickly fill in the basic colors. And let's also adjust the line work a bit. Next, we're going to sketch in the major regions of shading and highlighting. To do this, we need to bear in mind the basic forms. And it's also a good idea to think about the light sources in your image. So we have basically a big sphere and some cylinders, so let's shade according to that. I don't know, where am I going to put the main light source? The main light source is going to be up here, and it's going to come basically like this. Okay, I'm gonna call that good enough for now. As an optional next step, if you like, you can smoothen out these regions so that we don't have a hard edge between the dark, medium and light regions. One way is called blending. Pick an airbrush with soft edges and set the opacity to about 50%. Pick one of the colors and paint over the edge. Then pick another color from the transition zone and paint over the edge again. And repeat this process until you have a nice smooth gradient. And then you do the same for all regions. And I just realized I completely forgot about the cast shadow. So one way we can add a cast shadow without messing up the work we've already done is to add another layer. I'm going to give you like a preview of one thing you can do with most softwares is you can use, let's create a new layer first and let's pick a light blue color, something like this. And I'm gonna paint my cast layer shadow. This light is coming from over here, which means I expect this wing to cast a shadow onto the dragon's body. So I'm gonna draw this shadow in light blue. So why am I drawing it in light blue? Bear with me here. To send the blending mode of the layer to multiply. Multiply always darkens the layer, and because I set it to blue, it darkens it and it gives it a slightly bluish tint. So we've got a shadow layer which causes everything to be darker and just a little bluer. You can see also that I've drawn over this edge. If I want to fix that, there's an easy way to do that in Krita too. If you're in Photoshop, you need to look up clipping mask if you don't know how to do it. But in Krita, you can just click on this alpha, and that means that everywhere where on the below layer it's transparent, it would disappear. There's a lot of blending modes. You can even use screen, which lightens it rather than darkens it, or multiply. And there's many of these, but you don't need to know any of them. It's fun playing around with them. And on the long run, you might want to learn some more, but for a beginner, it's more than enough to know multiply and screen. So remember, add a layer and then set that layer to alpha inheritance, paint in the shadow, set the layer to multiply. In fact, I'm going to modify it a bit, and I'm going to pick a slightly darker blue. I'm going to pick the same blue but a bit darker. And that would darken it a bit more. So now, because I set alpha lock on, I can easily paint over it, only painting over the opaque parts. And then when I reactivate alpha inheritance, it hides the parts where it's transparent on the layers below. And then when I set to multiply, it darkens it. So I just need to clean it up a little bit. Let's rename this layer to avoid confusion in the future. Cast layer. Cast shadow. And I'm gonna do some final touch-ups in areas where I think it looks a little weird, like here. So, good job everybody, we're finally finished. We've made a lot of progress. We've learned a lot. We're still not experts, of course, but we've come a long way. There's still a lot of places that this dragon can be improved, but it's not bad, especially considering that I drew it from the imagination, and it's actually the first time I made a serious attempt at painting a dragon, so I think it's actually pretty good. Anyway, let's have a look at the original which we drew. So this is our baseline.